I hate you.
Hate away, sister.
Moral Orel is one of the most fascinating shows I've ever seen on television. Never before have I gone from hating a series to absolutely loving it. What I assumed was crude, surface-level shock humor ended up being one of the greatest social commentaries about religious dogma that I've ever witnessed. Season 1 of Moral Orel is deceptively misleading, coming across more as a dark slice-of-life comedy. I tried watching the show when I was a teenager, but I could not stomach it, and I gave up after the first season. And over 15 years later, I would revisit the series and see it for the masterpiece it truly was. Now, I have already done a video talking about the depth of Moral Orel before, to which you can watch if you want. Link is in the description. But in this video, I'm going to rank what I consider to be the top 10 most disturbing episodes of the series. Because, like, when you quantify these episodes into a list, you get a real sense of understanding how utterly dark Moral Orel could be, and not merely out of shock value. I'm talking about soul-ripping, heart-crushing stories that, despite being conveyed by stop-motion characters, feels exceptionally real. So, let's take a closer look at the top 10 most disturbing episodes of Moral Orel.
I'm a
Uh-oh, what's that sound? Yeah, it's the sponsor. Hey, we'll do this real fast, all right? I want to give a big shout out to this video's sponsor, War Thunder. Yeah, what's more appropriate than M1 Abram tanks and toxic fathers, right? Blow them up. Boom. For those who don't know, War Thunder is a free-to-play multiplayer military action game where you throw down in glorious battle on the ground, in the air, and in the high seas. Not the drink, I'm talking about the ocean.
Captain!
Yeah?
It's on the PC, it's on the PlayStation, it's on the Xbox, hell, it's even on the Mac. Now, I'm a sucker for large-scale battles, to which War Thunder captures perfectly. I don't use this word often, I probably should not, but it's kind of epic. Also, I like realistic battles and damage systems, to which War Thunder cooks up perfectly. For your vehicle, there's no health bar. So if you take a hit, like a direct shot on your tracks, you can kiss those tracks goodbye, they're dead, but your tank can still live on. So keep up your guard. On top of that, there's a broad variety of locations, detailed customization, tons of upgradable modules, and the combo of equipment from both the 20th century up to the modern present times. Actually, the latest update, Sons of Attila, added an entire family of unique Hungarian ground vehicles to the game. In addition to that, aerial battles have become even more atmospheric, thanks to the voice warning systems that have been added, like those in modern fighters. Also, the graphics have been improved with new visual effects that now dynamically change depending on lighting. Just more icing on the cake when it comes to immersion. So, download War Thunder for free today by using the link in the description. All new players and those who have not played War Thunder for half a year or more will receive some special bonuses, such as rentals for the P-40E-1 aircraft, an M4 tank for a week, along with free unique skins for them, a special Eagle of Valor decor, 100,000 Silver Lions, 3 premium vehicles for free, a week of premium accounts, and even more gifts. Hurry up! The American Vehicle bonus season will end soon. And on that note, back to the video. Would Clay destroy Orel in War Thunder? Yeah, I think he would. That's episode number 6. Who am I kidding? That's all the episodes. Number 10, God Chef. Well, yeah, this one has Orel artificially, yeah, that word, doing that to every woman in Moralton. I mean, we could go into more detail, but that really says everything you need to know. This was the episode that filled me with the most disgust when I first watched the series. Knowing what was happening and what Orel was doing was downright uncomfortable. Again, this episode comes from season 1, so it's before the show has any real meat on its bones. So the shock value of what Orel is doing and the name of God is really all the episode has to say. Regardless, it needs to be mentioned, because I know the sentiment I feel for this episode is shared with many others. And the episode itself was one of the greatest barriers that prevented people from watching the rest of the show. Yes, it is that disturbing.
Oh.
Number 9. The best Christmas ever. What started off as a raunchy episodic series of absurdist critiques of Christian doctrine takes a turn for the serious and the season 1 finale of Moral Orel. While there had been small glimpses at the underlying character study at play in the show, it wasn't until this episode, at the end of the first season, that Moral Orel finally shows its hand with a comparative gut punch that feels anything but funny. This episode turns nearly everything about the Puppington family that had been up until this point played mostly for laughs, poking fun lighting at the hypocrisy of a Christian family, and reframes it all to be deathly serious, highlighting the actual damage and effects such incongruencies have on the youngest members of the family. Orel, constantly characterized as someone with unwavering faith, having grown up entirely indoctrinated, faces a series of emotional blows that are the first of many challenges to his faith. After a typical start of the episode, with what first appears to be a Christmas carol being sung in the car on the way to church, which is then revealed to be the family reciting a local pizzeria commercial, the episode then cuts to Christmas Eve at the Puppingtons, setting up the tree, and more importantly, the evening in Clay and Blaberta's room. For the first time, we really laser in on the implications of their relationship and how broken it really is. How they've separated their beds with a literal wall. How the resentment between each other from a marriage continued merely for the sake of appearance, and how Shapey, and the fact that what the viewer has assumed up until this point was a joke for the sake of the audience, actually underpins a lot of the pair's misgivings with each other. It's examined here with raw emotion, the pain between these two. The episode then quickly subverts this by having Orel accidentally eavesdrop on the conversation, lulling you back into this thinking that this will be more of the same, with the discussion being overheard and misinterpreted by Orel as confirmation that Shapey is the second coming of Jesus, just in time for Christmas Day. Things are then subverted again as we cut back to the parents. Clay storms out of the house in the middle of the night after the two decide to get a divorce. The alleged adultery and resulting birth of Shapey being the final straw in a marriage that was already barely being held together. Orel's ideal Christmas Day is completely deflated. The shenanigans happening with his brother that are usually the focus of the show entirely ignored by both his family and the episode itself, as he realizes that his entire world is collapsing with his parents getting a divorce. The cold, factual exposition of this information from Blaberta as she picks up her kids from the church and her immediate willingness to abandon Orel there to his own devices just for being confused over Clay's absence leaves him bewildered and confused. The episode ends with Orel staring into the window of the local pub, watching Clay drinking himself into a stupor as Danielle comforts and flirts with him at the bar. The final twist of the knife comes that, despite the complete train wreck of a holiday, Orel looks up, speaking directly to God, that he still has faith that it could still be the best Christmas ever. You still have 2 minutes, only for the camera to slowly pan outwards before cutting to credits. His faith goes unanswered, like so many in their moment of need. It's a savage change of tone, and the repercussions of this episode cascade through the remainder of the series. This episode sets the bar for what the rest of the show will feel like, and the kind of commentary it will be providing going forward. The kid gloves from this point forward are off.
And I have faith in you.
Episode 8, Offensiveness. Our first real look into Miss Censordoll and her obsession with eggs. The plot of this episode itself is pretty standard moral Orel. Orel takes a lesson taught to him by an adult, in this case, Miss Censordoll, trying to take him under her wing and involve him into picketing with her, to end up having picketing eggs, her favorite food. because where they come from is sinful. But the real disturbing nature of the episode itself is the visuals from Orel learning where the eggs come from and the unfortunate implications for the farmer and how the hens themselves are set up. The fact that after the eggs are successfully banned, despite Miss Sensordoll's misgivings, there's an entire black market already in place on the farm with even more unfortunate implications. Which means that the episode definitely has its discomfort. But I wouldn't necessarily call it a heavy hitter compared to some of the bombs in Season 3. Oh, we're just getting started.
Completely enveloped by that soiled, evil, maternal opening.
Huh. I gotta go throw up all of a sudden.
Number 7, nesting. Honestly, this episode qualifies just for the visuals of Clay's ovular nightmare vision alone. I describe the imagery to have you share in my pain, but I think everything that was on screen is against terms of services here on YouTube, so, we'll skip that. What was seen cannot be unseen. And Sensordoll's weird stroking of Orel while talking about eggs? Yeah, that's a close second. Jesus Christ. We're not even 5 minutes in yet. The episode is packed with bizarre images and horrible implications about the sexual nature of Clay when it comes to his mother, leading to an affair with Sensordoll and a weird dommy-mommy kind of deal. All so she can get eggs unbanned from Moralton? I mean, obvious there was going to be damage there, but damn. Also, the fact that Clay's dead-end job referred to throughout the entire series is that he's the mayor, Jeez. But the most poignant moment of the episode itself comes from a scene after the debate, where Clay demands that Orel tells him what Sensordoll is planning by dropping out of the election even though she was clearly the frontrunner. He says that the mind is a scary place, but that buried deep in the mind is something even more terrifying: the truth. Clearly for him, in reference to all the trauma he's repressed and is now expressing itself in a most unfortunate manner. When Orel tells the truth, though, that he legitimately doesn't know what Sensordoll is planning, Clay storms off, yelling at Orel that he's glad that he shot him. Jesus Christ, dude. Oh, by the way, Clay shoots Orel. We'll talk about that here later in the video.
And I'm glad I shot you.
Number 6, grounded. Orel's parents are, monsters. They're just downright monsters. As if we did not have enough of a clue of that from, episodes from before. But in this episode, we see that Clay enjoys punishing his son because he lavishes the power trip. When he realizes that Orel no longer is fazed by his belt spankings, he decides to exact a more extreme form of punishment. One designed not to teach him a lesson, but to hit him in his son's soft spot, to really make him hurt. Clay grounds Orel from going to church. Obviously, this sends Orel into a panic. He's been raised his entire life to fear God, and that going to church on Sundays is a moral imperative. His immortal soul is in jeopardy by not being allowed to go. This panic, though, pleases Clay. Both Clay and Blaberta are then shown getting ready for church and gleefully rubbing it in their son's face to twist the knife even further. Over the next few days, Orel begins to descend into madness over the sin he feels he's committing. The visuals are played as a joke, being a mixture of symptoms from a junkie and then also an insane asylum inmate. But the fact still stands that a young child is being emotionally manipulated by his caretakers. After completely breaking down and making and wearing a cardboard copy of a church, Orel ends up accidentally getting hit by lightning while climbing a building trying to get a cross for the top of it, which acted as a lightning rod, and Orel nearly dies. During this time between his accident and being resuscitated, Orel has an experience where he thinks he met God, but that he could not get into heaven because he missed church. He tries to apologize to God, but is revived before being able to make his case. Frustrated, Orel then attempts to unalive himself multiple more times to try and get back into that state, which he does successfully. And all the while, Clay's most pressing concern is that he's racking up hospital bills. The final attempt at electrocution sees him dead for a comparatively longer time than the other attempts, during which he has an extended vision which, while obtuse, seems to imply that church, heaven, and the nature of faith entirely aren't exactly what has been expressed by his peers. When he tries to express this, Clay cuts him off, taking him back to his study for another spanking, which brings us right back to the beginning of the hunting trip episode, which is nature, which we'll talk about here in a bit. As we realize, Orel's explanation and the beginning of that episode, which seemed like some sort of sexual joke, was actually him referring to attempting to unalive himself. The fact that the kid went through all of that only to immediately end up being shot by his drunken father is just depressing. The silver lining to all this, though, is Orel's near-death experience leads him to the cusp of realizing a much more healthy interpretation of his faith. That church, that God, is inside all of us, instead of literally being inside a building. It feels like another crack in Orel's indoctrination, further breaking his concept of God away from what he's been raised to believe.
Oh, well, I learned all about heaven, and guess what? It's not at all like we thought it was.
Number 5. Passing. Everything we've seen up until this point has made you justified in your hatred for Clay Poppington. So of course, the show has to throw a monkey wrench into that feeling too. Passing shows that for all the breadth of space, the corruption of Moralton that Season 3 has exposed, it also spans time as well, bringing us back to the beginning of the hunting trip episodes where Clay explains the family tradition of passing on a handgun called Gunny to the eldest son. But then we cut to a flashback of Clay's childhood, and the revelations here do a lot to temper our hatred for this man with pity. Much like the one he'd grow up to be the patriarch of, was similarly dysfunctional, both his parents at their wits' end with each other, much the same way that Clay himself is with Blaberta. At this point though, Clay is entirely oblivious. He's a happy-go-lucky mama's boy, clearly spoiled by his mother at the expense of her relationship with her husband. We learn, however, that despite being raised as singular and special, and developing a bit of an ego because of it, Clay was actually one of many siblings, except that none of them ever came to term because of his mother's irresponsible behavior while pregnant, leading to a series of over 10 miscarriages. This is implied to be the linchpin of the parents' tension, but the revelation also enrages Clay. So, what does he do? Well, he grabs Gunny, which his father had earlier that evening tried to pass on to him, and a gunshot rings out. Both his parents freak out, thinking that their son is dead, only for Clay's father to notice a bottle of ketchup and realize that Clay is playing a prank on them. However, the violent swing from panic to relief aggravates Clay's mother's heart, and she has a heart attack and the stress kills her. Clay's father then blames him for the death of his mother and hates him for it, ignoring him unless Clay acts out enough that he'll physically hit his son to shut him up. Because this is the only form of attention Clay gets from his father, after 12 years of being doted on by his mother, he equates the abuse with love and fishes for it constantly. We then cut back to the present with Clay handing Gunny to Orel. And just like in the Season 2 finale, he immediately pulls Gunny back and offers his son a different pistol instead. Only now, we know it wasn't just a bit, it was something far more impactful. Number 4, sacrifice. In this episode, multiple characters all come together in the pub as a few plot points all tie together. But the most striking moment of the episode is, of course, the impassioned monologue from Clay as he breaks down, yelling at everyone in the pub, enraged at them. He makes sexist remarks at Dolly, causing her to storm out of her own bar, then accusing all the men that remain of various indecencies. Of Papermouth for being weak for allowing another man to sleep with his wife. Of Putty for potentially being the one who did that. Of Potterwheel killing his wife instead of taking care of her. But this outburst only externalizes Clay's own sense of failure and insecurity. He feels weak. something he's been running from his entire life. But until now, he's been able to stuff that feeling away. When the rest of the people leave the bar, instead of being goaded on into a fight, he chastises them from being sensitive and being a poor influence on his son. Yet the one most controlled by their emotions, the one who is being the most sensitive, is him.
With all you people as role models, no wonder my son is sensitive.
The episode takes place on Easter and signifies another holiday that Clay is absent from the rest of the family on, with the end credits showing him going back to the wildlife preserve to hunt alone. He misses the first actual spoken line from Shapey.
When I'm thirsty, it feels how I feel when I'm alone.
What?
Loneliness and the desire for connection is the underpinning of nearly every character conflict in this show. So Shapey's first line is pretty poignant, especially considering his stepfather's prior outburst. Number 3, help. This episode does a lot to recontextualize the, shall we call it, division of blame between Blabberta and Clay for how much of a disaster the relationship and resulting family is. We already got the gut punch of how victimized and messed up Clay's childhood was, to at least pity him as much as we detest the person he's become. But help goes even further in showing how he is just as much a victim as a villain. Blabberta recalls how she met Clay, reflecting on her life up until that point being the perpetual third wheel. Her friends were all getting married while she was still single. Her family found her redundant. Her community found her useless. She was alone. This isolation and the desperate need to feel valuable was the foundation of their entire relationship, and was due to Blabberta's desperate need to be helpful, along with the peer pressure of getting married. So in essence, their marriage was based on nothing else. Oh, wait, hold on. Yes, there's one more thing. Manipulation. There's that too.
It seems all I've been doing since I met you is help and help and help and help and help and help and help you.
Wow, that is a lot of help.
Clay was shown to end up at a wedding Blabberta was also attending by accident. Despite his deranged childhood, he seems to be relatively normal in the small sliver of him we see in this flashback, content to live alone and uninterested in starting a family. His upbringing clearly affected him, but it could be interpreted that he'd risen above the cycle of abuse and wasn't going to repeat it. Probably the biggest clue into that, before meeting Blabberta, is Clay's most glaring character flaw: his alcoholism, which at this point wasn't even a thing. He did not drink until Blabberta pressured him into it at the reception. And when he could not handle his liquor, Blabberta ends up hating him, punching him out for being too drunk, then lies to him after he wakes up from passing out, that she helped him out when he was drunk and to thank her and that they should get married. And when Clay expresses hesitation with this suggestion, she threatens to leave him. So while we felt bad for Blabberta for being ignored, we also see how she was the architect of her own downfall and took down a potentially innocent man with her in a self-centered bid for acceptance.
And do you, Blabberta Hymantact, take Clay Puppington as your lawful wedded husband?
Why not?
Number 2, Alone. Season 3 was all about expanding the scope of storytelling in Moral Orel, moving beyond merely the puppeting family and showing that all of Moralton is suffering as a result of their zealous faith. Alone goes even deeper in exploring a few of the secondary characters we've seen recur throughout the show, who all live in the same apartment complex, cutting between each of their 3 separate evenings. Nurse Bendy, who up until this point has been portrayed as a bit of a floozy, a lady who is uninterested in her job and constantly having sex with Principal Fakey, seemingly only for what the audience assume is some sort of favor, is shown to be incredibly disturbed mentally, regressing into a childlike state at home, playing pretend family with a series of stuffed animals, with her entire apartment appearing like a children's playroom. While saying grace before dinner with her family, the prayer devolves into a monologue of how emotionally beaten down she feels over being objectified. No one sees her as a person, so she has to come home and create people who see her as such. When the teddy bear standing in for her husband accidentally falls on her while she is cleaning up a spill, she has a complete mental breakdown, backing into the corner and panicking, interpreting the bear falling as her husband mounting her. Even in her fiction, the man in her life is now being interpreted as wanting sex from her. We cut away before this is resolved, and don't go back.
Not like everyone, not you! You're special, you care! Not at home!
Next door, Miss Sculptham is shown that she had apparently at some point given herself an abortion, a fact that she's not proud of, as she immediately changes the radio station that's playing Reverend Putty's sermon as soon as he mentions the moral failings of abortion. The news station talks about a criminal case that had taken place in Morrilton. It plays in the background as we pan over to Sculptham's family tree, where it seemed that she had dyed her hair from the natural blonde to black for some reason. She then steps into her bathroom, and we see an unhinged display of newspaper clippings referring to the crime being talked about on the radio, and the pieces begin to come together. To help capture a serial R-word who was not attracted to blondes, Sculptham dyed her hair black, luring the man into her apartment at some point, and was abused by the man before the authorities apprehended him. She hears on the radio that the man has died in prison, but for some reason, she's emotional about it. Instead, she sees a vision of the man in her mirror, and she touches herself to the memory of the encounter, leaving us to wonder if this is a case of Stockholm Syndrome or if the arousal was the entire point of her plan in the first place. It's very complicated and very dark. The final story is an examination of probably the character with the most on-screen time of the three, Miss Censordoll. She had the spotlight in an entire episode alongside Orel, shown to be a prude and having a bit of an ego. She also was shown to have a strange fascination with eating eggs, to the point that it's her undoing in that episode. While it was easy to shrug this off as a comedic quirk, we find out here through a conversation with her mother that the egg obsession comes from the fact that she herself does not have any, because her mother removed her reproductive organs as a child. Whether she even consciously makes the connection between the two is left unclear. However, the fact that she's comparatively pure has left Censordoll with a bit of a Virgin Mary divinity complex. And she takes another phone call where she schemes with an unnamed third party over plans for the future of Morrilton, seeing herself as the rightful matriarch of the town. This is just another example of moral Orel taking characters you thought were just comedy bits and making you feel guilty for ever laughing in the first place. Everyone in this show is broken. Everyone has suffered to some degree. For a town so obsessed with religion, it really does feel like God has abandoned Morrilton, which I suppose just further drives home the point of the entire show.
I am not holier than thou, mother, but I am holier than you.
That leads us to the #1 episode, to which I consider the darkest, and to be honest, I'm sure that many others share in this opinion. But the darkest episode in Moral Orel is actually a two-parter, and it's, of course, nature. I consider both parts to represent one story, one episode, because they're connected. Deal with it. This is the second time in which the series really kicks up things a notch, with nature being the season 2 finale. And if the best Christmas ever was the first crack in Orel's faith in God, then nature is the shattering of Orel's faith in his father, the other authority figure he had placed a lot of weight in. Clay has been portrayed throughout the entire series as having an alcohol problem, but this is brought to a head here as he decides to bring Orel on a hunting trip and teach him how to use guns. Clay is shown to be a rather stereotypical conservative Christian archetype, with his seemingly paradoxical fascination with guns, while Orel, being someone who takes his faith seriously and literally, is clearly a pacifist. While he initially is excited to spend time with his father, the condition of having to kill an animal repulses him. The episode shows him interacting with wildlife in a far more friendly nature, each time to Clay's disapproval, punctuated with more drinking. The first part comes to a head where Clay, now entirely intoxicated at the end of the day, is feasting on a dog he killed after Orel couldn't pull the trigger, and denying his son any food as punishment. When Orel expresses reservation with how much he's drinking, Clay breaks down entirely. His violent ravings shift wildly from chastising his son, to the alcohol in his hand, to his wife, who he clearly sees hunting trips as an escape from, to, most crucially, himself losing coherence almost entirely as Orel becomes more and more disturbed as the tirade continues. The episode ends with a shot ringing out from the handgun Orel was holding, with the audience unaware of the outcome. Part 2 begins with the realization Orel did not hit Clay, but the remaining bottles of booze he was holding, which of course enrages Clay even further. The scene crescendos with a drunken Clay picking up his rifle and accidentally shooting Orel in the leg. He then blames Orel for being irresponsible. Then he ties up the wound with Orel's favorite sweater and then drinks the rubbing alcohol instead of using it on his son's wound. Orel then stares at his drunken father, a man he has been shown to love and respect for 2 seasons despite everything, and coldly states, "I hate you." It's probably the first real antagonistic statement from the character in the entire show, and he speaks for the entire audience at that moment. Clay brushes off the comment and immediately passes out, leaving Orel, frightened and bleeding, to his own devices. As if the situation could not get any worse, in the middle of the night, their camp is encroached by a bear, who is attracted by the rambling of Clay in his sleep, and attempts to attack him, which forces Orel to pick up the handgun he was given by Clay and kill the bear, thus saving the man who, in his drunken stupor, abused him and seemed entirely uninterested in his well-being. Clay then sleeps through the entire day, waking up in the morning only to have Orel give him an extra blanket. When he finally wakes up though, and notices the bear corpse, he assumes Orel was the one who killed it, and was excited, asking Orel if he'd done it. This is Orel's moment. He's been trying for the entire series to earn Clay's approval and has failed thus far. But here, he's finally done it. He can make his father proud. But that's no longer something he values. He's seen who his father truly is, and his approval is now seen by Orel as a moral failing. So he lies and says Clay killed the bear. This episode is an absolutely brutal series of events to put a child through, and any empathy or humor we could still have attached to Clay as a character are permanently wiped away. This man is a monster, and the antithesis to the faith he claims to profess.
Hate away, sister. Hate away.
Overall, Moral Orel stands as one of the greatest 180s I've ever seen in a show. Its tone, its narrative, its themes. After season 1, it all went in this new direction that utterly surprised me and made me a huge fan of the show. It truly was a trailblazer with its intent and themes, and used the vessel of Orel to demonstrate the sheer destruction of religious dogma via a toxic family. Yet despite all the darkness, it's encouraging to see a finale where Orel had found peace and still retained his faith. It wasn't religion that was necessarily the enemy here. It was terrible people who weaponized religion. The final shot of the series provides us closure for Orel, with his loving family surrounding him, providing him the healthy environment he has always yearned for. Now, it's bittersweet knowing his history, but it just goes to show that even those who have suffered past trauma can still find a happy ending.